mediumship for me is something of a passion. It's something that I really enjoy and become engrossed in. It is something that you can't help be moved by. It plants seeds of hope for people. It inspires the living. It plants a seed that life is worth living for. It helps with grief. It doesn't cure the bereaved, but it plants a seed of hope, inspiration, and a knowledge that our loved ones still live on. As a medium, to experience the communication in the moment is a very privileged place to be, because it's not just evidence we're giving to prove life, we're telling the story of life. We are experiencing a life through somebody else's eyes. It is something that I cherish, because in that moment of surrendering to the essence of the communicator, I lose the sense of who I am. I become that person. I see things their way. I emotionally experience things their way. And in those moments, it allows myself to have an empathy for life and makes myself look at life differently, to live life differently, and always to understand that we're gaining a learning of life, we're gaining knowledge of life, and we try to live that life the best way that we can. I've always said that mediumship or spiritual development should come with a health warning, because we change so much. If you ask me the question, am I the same person I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago? I would say most certainly not. I've grown, I've gained a greater sense and depth of life. I look at life differently, and I cherish every moment that I live, not just for the good times, but even those what we may deem negative, because for me they're growing pains, they're where we learn the most. So mediumship is something that is very much cherished. It is something that I gain a deeper sense of life through. It helps me engage in life differently, and it helps me gain mastery of self, of my emotions, physical being and thoughts, because we start to see a different world. We start to engage in life differently. And for me, when we do a mediumship reading or a demonstration, I surrender to the will of that communicator, because I know that in those moments they're going to share their life story through their evidence, and through that story and evidence I'll gain a different perception of life. I will see it through somebody else's eyes, and I will learn from that. But also in those moments that we cherish as we work, we start to really see what life meant to somebody else, and we take that on board mindfully and soulfully. It changes the whole perception of who we are, what we're about, and to be able to have the pleasure of touching that soul in front of me who's receiving that contact, I don't think there's words that describe it. To see the light of hope or a spark of hope ignite really does have a profound effect on myself as the medium, or should do on any medium. Because once we know we've done some good and we've told that story of life and we've given that evidence, it leaves a profound feeling with you that wants you to do that for everybody. And we know we're not the medium for everybody, and no reading's guaranteed. But what we do in that moment is plant seeds of hope, a seed that inspires the living. I think a lot of people think that mediumship's all about giving evidence that we survive the physical death of the body. But for me, it's about inspiring the living, how our loved ones still live on and how they still watch over us, still care for us, still love us, and still miss us just as much as we miss them. I think that needs to be really understood by many mediums, that we're a seed of hope, a seed of inspiration, that we're not the answer to grief, we're a stepping stone along that journey. As my grief for a loved one will be totally different for the grief of somebody else. And we also have to consider that grief comes in many shapes and forms. It's not just the love or the loss of a loved one. It's also about the loss of a loved one still here living. In that moment where we can lose a relationship, that we may lose a career, a home, there's still a loss, there's still a grief, and somebody's living through it. So whether we're working evidently or where we're working psychically to help somebody understand and empower their lives, once again, all about inspiration. In that moment, it's about our empathy of what we're feeling, how we're being impressed, how we're being moved by either the soul or the spirit world in that moment. I think as a medium, we need to surrender to that natural flow of life and what is being given. I remember very much in my early days where I heard people saying that they thought working for the spirit world was a greater way of working instead of psychically. But when you see somebody grieving for a lost relationship or a loss of a home or a family, you really feel for that person and what they've gone through, and it gives you that real insight. So as a medium, we have to surrender to that power and that love that is being immersed and emanated either from the loved one or from the soul of the person in front of you. I think it's important that we surrender to that evidence, that love, in the way that it needs to be. For me, mediumship is something that can change somebody's life. It can really profoundly improve their life. But also knowing that a reading at the wrong time can also be detrimental. Sometimes a medium has to do what we call pastoral work, which is just to talk, just to listen. And I think that's really important at times, that we make that judgment call. So mediumship is very much an honour, a privilege, can be a pleasure. I think it's really important that we remember that we're not the answer for everything. We're not the elixir that cures all. We are just a seed that is there in their moment that can inspire somebody to change, to be more uplifted, to find peace, to be a stepping stone to those answers. Remember that we only have 30 minutes or so to interact with somebody, and 30 minutes sometimes doesn't feel long enough. So as a medium, it's very privileged work that we do, and mediumship has a profound effect. But I'm also very precious about mediumship. I believe that it should be done for the greater good. I think it should be done with a real understanding of what it's about, not just saying that your loved one's here and this is what they're telling me. There should be evidence, evidence, and evidence. And for everything where we might say they're watching over you, we need more evidence. It is about that evidence that leaves or touches somebody. But we also must remember as well, evidence comes in different ways. I was once asked the question, what makes good evidence? And my response will be, well, you would have to ask the recipient in that moment, whether it is emotional evidence, whether it is that factual, objective evidence. We can do readings for people and give them great evidence, well, what we think is great, but actually they may just want to know the personal facts, the emotional interactions, the little sayings. So sometimes names and addresses and places isn't what people are looking for. It's an emotional attachment to that person. So I think the greatest thing that I could say about mediumship from a medium's point of view would be to remind people that we must surrender to the will of the communicator, deliver what they want to deliver, and not control a contact, not look for certain types of evidence or demand certain types of evidence. If we receive a contact with somebody that was quite quiet and it was all about just sitting together and sharing memories or watching TV together, then that person's not going to give their full name and address and locations, credit card numbers, telephone numbers. It's all about those personal interactions. And as a medium, we must remember that who we're working for and what our objective is, which is to deliver the words in the way that that loved one wants to express them, and to put ourselves to one side to do that, to let go of ego, to let go of what other people think of. We, as a medium, can't be the medium for everybody, and there'll always be somebody out there that will think, well, that wasn't very good, or there wasn't much evidence in there. But we've got to remember where that recipient is at this time, what they're going through in life, how they're missing their loved one, and knowing how much that loved one meant to them by the evidence that is given. Then we start to see the real beauty of mediumship and what it does for people.